There are 7 distinctive characteristics of cloud computing. Firstly, it's internet or web-based, and what that means is we define, start and access these services over network-based connections from our PCs or laptops or even phones. They're off-site, so if we want these IT services, generally speaking, it's in a data center that's not yours. Also, they're virtual, so you can assemble the resources that you need using essentially drag and drop or techniques which are very similar. The other key characteristic is principally these are paid for on a pay-by-go, pay-as-you-go or subscription basis. So there isn't an annual contract usually. Initially there is a monthly or even less payment style. So typically you give your credit card and use resources, get billed at the end of the month. I say usually there because actually if you are going to use resources for a longer period, then you can actually get substantial discounts by paying in advance. Mostly these are shared resources. So what that means is quite often you'll be using a host which could be shared with other users. Because these are virtual machines, which I talk about in the next talk, they are completely independent and there is no possibility that your application would be visible to the other party's application. The starting setup and configuration are all very straightforward. So the suppliers are addressing a mass market. This is very straightforward to do. As simple as signing up to Netflix or Spotify or anything like that. The resources are on demand. So when you want something, click a few things, it starts. You start to be billed for it. When you've finished using it, you terminate that resource, it stops being charged. So for example, here's a software as a service case, Gmail. I could have used Outlook 365 equally. Well, Gmail initially is free, funded by advertising, but if you're an organization and you want to use Gmail, you would get an independent or your own email service which is paid for centrally. Compared to hosting an email service in-house, the costs are greatly reduced. You don't need to depend on specialist in-house skills, and you don't have the hardware and software maintenance issues. Another example, the most basic one, is using compute services. So Amazon EC2, Electronic Compute Cloud, allows you to define, set up PCs in the cloud of multiple sizes. So I think at the moment there's like at least 60 different kinds of machines, different memory configurations, different number of compute cores. They say whether they're optimized for compute or for storage or whatever. And the smallest of those instances start at an American cent per hour. If you wanted to use something which had 15 gig of memory, 8 cores, I've got one here, it's 1690 GB of instant storage, so this is a beast basically. You'd be using that to run SAP. That would probably cost you 80 cents an hour. And the sizes go up, so clearly you wouldn't choose any of these larger services unless you had a specific problem. But if you did have a problem that required an extremely large server, instead of acquiring that server, you can just rent one, run it for a few hours. Suppose it's going to cost you $10 or $20. There are some like that. You wouldn't have got access to a server like that otherwise without considerable investment. It is worthwhile considering, though, the relative costs of the services that you're using and how much the basic ownership cost would be. So this slide is a few years old, but basically illustrates the point. If you want to store a petabyte, so that's 1,000 terabytes, the drives themselves, it says here, would have cost you $80,000. So that's about right, because it would have said about $81 per terabyte. So we're paying a little bit less than that now, but it illustrates the point. But once you've got those drives, if you wanted that amount of storage and you were going to buy it from an online provider, there are multiple examples here, and you can see the price might go up to $2 million from some of those larger suppliers. One thing about any of the numbers quoted here, prices change regularly, quite often in a downwards direction because of the competition. So the service that's mentioned here, the Amazon service which is mentioned here, is S3, which is quite that's an immediate access service. That's saying it would have been $2 million. But that same terabyte you could store in their long access service, which is Glacier, which isn't instant access. You might have to wait 24 hours to get access to the data, but that would cost much more reasonable, between $88,000 and $36,000. Of course, it doesn't seem particularly reasonable if you're on a student budget, but we're talking enterprise software here.